Welcome to The Fresh Cut by Ganjapreneur, where we get straight to the source, interviewing the growers, the retail associates, and other talented people on the ground that are helping this industry thrive. Today we're speaking with Nancy, a cannabis educator and natural health and wellness advocate. Nancy Southern's education and career incorporate creativity, energy, psychology, mental health education, spiritual growth, and personal development as a creative life coach. She now works as a cannabis educator and outreach director for Peace of Mind Cannabis in Bellingham, Washington. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you, Cara. It's wonderful to be here with you.
Let's talk a little bit today about what you do, who you educate, and how you work to make this industry great. How did you get started as a cannabis educator?
Well, as you said in your wonderful introduction of me, thank you for that. I've been sort of doing adult education my whole life in terms of coaching and mental health education, that sort of thing, and personal development classes. So the teaching part was a natural, but how cannabis came into the picture was about 5 years ago, my health was just continuing to decline, and I was having a real struggle finding what would work for me. And because I'm natural health oriented, I was looking for something that was more natural. And I didn't know what that was, and I hadn't even thought about cannabis. And then a friend of mine who lives a couple towns over sent me an email about a online video series called The Sacred Plant. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. And it was all about the medical use of what they were calling medical marijuana. I seldom use that name for a reason. I call it cannabis 90% of the time, but that was its orientation then. Mm-hmm. So I watched a couple of episodes, and it was like a light went on for me and said, oh my goodness, this may be the missing piece for my complex group of symptoms and things that just didn't fit into any one box. And the things that I'd been trying weren't quite getting me over that hump towards climbing back up into wellness. I kept going downhill into feeling more and more incapacitated by my health. So fortunately, I live in the state of Washington, which is legal not only for medical marijuana patients, where it initially started, in 2015, I believe it was, and then operational by 2016, the adult use aspect of it opened up. So I was very fortunate. I didn't have to go through the process of getting, certified medically. I didn't even know if I would qualify, because I wondered if my quote disease was bad enough, and I didn't want it to get bad enough to qualify.
Yeah.
So I was able to just look up a couple of dispensaries near my home and go down and check it out. And the second place I went to, they were so helpful. They answered my questions. They really heard my story in a way that I felt respected. I felt heard. I felt real desire on their part to help me find something in the world of cannabis that might get me headed back in the direction of well-being. So I came home with a product, and the young man was so dear. He even said to me, now, given what you've told me about yourself, you're probably pretty sensitive, because I hadn't used cannabis in decades. Mm-hmm. So you probably want to start low and go slow, which is a mantra I tell everybody I coach.
Crackpot in it.
Yes, because, the recommended dosage that is set by the state has nothing to do with any one individual's need for using it as a medicine.
Yeah.
But by the time I got home that day, I was so exhausted. I didn't have the energy to go through the rigmarole of diluting it into a form that I could take a couple of drops. So I said, what the heck, I'll just take the whole capsule. Well, I learned in a more challenging way that that wasn't the best choice. But again, since I had experienced cannabis in my 20s and 30s, I, one, knew that it wouldn't last forever, that it would dissipate, and two, that the best way to cope with it is to look at it as energy and keep moving until it sort of just worked its way through my system, which I did. And then a beautiful thing happened. As after I peaked at the height of discomfort and it started to dissipate in my body, I felt a state of well-being that I hadn't felt in years. And at that moment, I said, I think this is the missing link. And now I've got to figure out how to use it, effectively for my circumstance, my symptoms, my lifestyle, etc. So the next day I went back to the dispensary and told the young man what I did, and he smiled and was very gracious about it. Well, you're not the first one to do that. And so we went over how to dilute it again. And so I did that. And I made a commitment that day because I'm already an adult educator, and I was looking for a new mission, I think, anyway, in my coaching life. So I said, I think this is my new calling. I'm supposed to teach my peers about cannabis for health and well-being. So for the next 5 months, I went to school by myself and online and every which way. I read books. I went to the library. I was just, totally focused and learning how to find what was just right for me. And I found it. And it wasn't that it was a quick fix or an immediate cure, absolutely not. But over the months, I could tell that my health was it was like my energy was just getting stronger. I had more stamina. I had less symptoms. Occasionally, I'd even get a really good night's sleep, which had been one of the issues. And the severe lows and severe anxieties that I had, that span was narrowing gradually over time. And that was a really remarkable awareness, was that it wasn't that it was just masking that symptom. It was actually helping my body to come into some sort of balance. And I was always, curious about that. So I'll tell you a little bit more about how I answered that question in a minute. So I knew that in my quest to teach, I had a gap between the knowledge that I had and the products that were available that any of my friends or associates might go looking for. And it was hard to transfer that knowledge to, well, how do I know what to buy? And so I just put out, the request, I need to work in a cannabis shop, and began to look around. And through serendipity and synchronicity and all those wonderful magical things that I have always loved, I was led to a store in Bellingham called Satori at that time. It's now Peace of Mind, but back then it was Satori. And they kind of were looking for somebody like me, because they already knew that they wanted to work with the older population, because they had already begun to see that it was one of the fastest growing demographics that were looking to use cannabis for health and wellness.
And quite underserved as well.
Yes. And so they were very supportive of helping me learn by giving me an opportunity to work in the store. So I've been behind the counter, in front of the counter, seeing the back side of things. I got to tour farms. I got to, go to producer, extraction companies, and really learn all the ins and outs. And I loved every minute of it. And so by that January, I'd gotten my medical marijuana consultant certification from the state of Washington. And I began to teach in senior centers and book clubs, also service organizations and churches. And churches, which was a pleasant surprise. They were very curious and wanted to know. And I think because of my age and because I have a background in mental health and natural healing, and had been teaching adults most of my life, I think they were more open to learning about it from me than say somebody who is just as knowledgeable or more so, who's half my age.
I'm very curious about your experience working in Satori, now Peace of Mind, in those first few months, because you were working with all age groups while your
Mhm.
focus was on seniors. So what kind of differences did you find between the various age groups and perhaps what they're looking for, and or how a consultant can help that demographic the most?
Well, in some ways, people are people.
Yeah.
And, we all get some of the same symptoms. The three most common things that people come into a cannabis for that they're hoping to get relief from is either some type of pain or physical discomfort. They're looking for help with sleep, either help getting to sleep or help staying asleep.
Mm.
And the third one is some type of mood imbalance where they're either really down and lethargic and, depleted all the time, or they're running around, feeling anxious. And so in that sense, there's not much difference in terms of most what people come from. The main difference is the older a person is, the more they're likely to, and particularly if they're not familiar with cannabis ever, and so they've got all this history of misinformation and more fear, is one of the first things they say is, well, I want relief from my pain, but I just don't want to get high. I'm really afraid of getting high. And so that's when the education begins, because I want them to understand that the whole plant is medicine, both that which helps to, perhaps bring reduced inflammation in joints and muscles, which most of the time might be the quote CBD part of it. And the THC is the part that's psychoactive and that gives you the high. It's all medicine, and it's all a matter of proportion and balance, and then finding that ratio of all the cannabinoids, but particularly those two, in the right relationship that helps you get the relief that you need for whatever symptom that you're working on. So my theory is I want to dispel the fear, but encourage respect, because it is powerful medicine.
That's a great catchphrase right there, Nancy.
Yeah, I try to make it as simple as possible, but it's not always possible.
No, and that's actually my next question, because we've both had the opportunity to work behind dispensary counter, and sometimes when you're really excited about the plant and you use these terms and different, scientific terms talking about the plant, it can really shut down a customer or a patient looking for products. And so, are there any buzzwords or good entryways to speak with a senior that won't make them just lock up and not want to engage any longer, not make
Yes,
them overly confused or out
right.
of their element?
Yes, good question. Well, the first thing is to ask questions and listen.
Mm.
They're going to want to tell you at least some part of their story, and you want to guide them away from talking about their quote diagnosis and all the pills they're taking to, but what are your symptoms? What
Mm.
are the symptoms that are most bothering you? Is it pain? Is it not being able to sleep? Is it just not feeling, quite right, not feeling like yourself? So as you can narrow down to simpler symptoms, that'll help you as the person behind the counter to guide them in the direction they may want to go. The next most important thing is to find out how they imagine themselves taking it in and using it. Do they want to inhale it? 99% of them aren't interested in smoking. Down the road, they might be interested in vaping because it can work more quickly for acute onset of a pain or something like that. But most of them, they're saying, no, I don't want to go anywhere near that. So automatically you're limiting the hundreds of choices that they are probably, the minute they walk in the shop, overwhelmed by the number of products on the shelf.
Indeed.
And so the sooner you can narrow that scope down to get them focused in one area, perhaps in your store where you have your tinctures, your topicals, your edibles, those kinds of things that don't look like, the stuff across the way that you gotta, light up and go for, because that's part of a history oftentimes that's pretty frightening and
Yeah.
that, could get in the way. So focusing on those three things. And then the other most important thing is to avoid cannabis or marijuana lingo and talk cannabis, facts. And that doesn't mean it has to be scientific, but instead of using words like being stoned or high, say, well, this is more of a relaxant type of a medicine. That's why the label is what it is. It's designed to either help you calm down or prepare you for sleep. And then this version is something that will help up your energy so that you feel like you can engage in your day and be focused and more attentive. Or this one is designed to reduce inflammation so that you have less pain in that joint. So
really, sorry.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Teaching them about the influence of these specific products rather than, getting blitzed or blazed or
Yes.
getting high.
Yeah, because that kind of language, is like a foreign language. They have no idea what you're talking about. And the implication is, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into?
Yeah.
And I don't want to be telling this part of my life story to my grandchildren. So
yeah, they might like it though.
They would, but
I
a
agree.
little bit of pride can get in the way.
How does the demographic of older adults respond to learning about the endocannabinoid system?
Well, when I'm teaching a seminar and have a little more time, that's the perfect environment to explain to them what had been a real question in my mind in the beginning, which was, how is it that this plant and the oil that comes from this plant can be so effective for so many different, imbalances or maladies? It's like, it can't be the end all be all, but why does it work so across the board? So the first thing I learned was that it's a botanical in a category known as an adaptogen. And an adaptogen is designed to balance the whole body. I said, okay, that makes sense. That I can live with that. And then in my studies, I came across this reference to something called the ECS, or endocannabinoid system. And as I learned about that, and by the way, this was only discovered in the mid-90s, so it's relatively new. It's only recently starting to be introduced into college medical training. Now that cannabis is catching on across the country and over 30 states have opened up for medical use. So doctors are going to need to know about this so that they can properly integrate it with other, plans
Absolutely.
for health and wellness. But what the deal is the body was magically made to be receptive specifically to the type of cannabinoids, which is the name of the molecule, found in the cannabis plant. So the cannabis plant, the molecules, THC and CBD originally, were the first two to be identified. And so this scientist in Israel decided he wanted to know why. He had the same question. Why is it that it works so well? So, science has evolved immensely since years ago, centuries ago, when cannabis had been used that way anyway. They just didn't know why it worked.
Yep.
He learned in the laboratory that there were cellular receptors all over the body, from the brain to your toes, that were receptive to hooking up, like a lock and key mechanism, with these plant-based cannabinoids. And he thought, oh, well, that makes sense. And the CB1s kind of tended to respond to THC, and CB2s were more receptive to CBD. But when both were present, the whole thing lit up in a much more magical and holistic way. It was like whole plant, whole body. I love that analogy.
Definitely.
Yeah. So then I began to understand how it could be helpful, because it's not designed to cure any one thing. I believe it's designed to bring the body itself with this master regulatory system called the endocannabinoid system, named after the cannabis plant, to bring the body itself and all of the sub-regulatory systems back into balance or homeostasis.
And so in your teachings within senior centers and churches, this idea of coming back to homeostasis that really locks in some more understanding about this kind of plant medicine?
Yes, because the allopathic model, which most everybody in our culture is aligned with, you have a problem, you take a pill.
Yeah.
It's like a 1-to-1 ratio, or a you wouldn't combine something from one area to another area. It's designed to be very selective, and as opposed to whole person.
Mm-hmm.
And see, I come out of the natural health world, and so I like thinking whole person all the time, because
Absolutely.
in my mind, body, mind, and spirit is all connected. And yeah, it feels great to be relieved of pain, but if it somehow causes an adverse effect in my mind or in some other part of my body, then I really haven't gained much, except for I've traded one symptom for another.
Yeah.
And cannabis hasn't taken the place of my other healthcare protocols. What it has done is given me a foundation of support for my body to respond more positively to the other things that I do. And so to me, I love music, and I often analogize things to music or art. And I call it, the CBD is my bass note. And I add a little THC to make sure I don't miss out on the treble clef. So it's a nice way to say that one is for stabilizing and for handling the large muscle masses and relieving tension and, relaxing the inflammation in the organs and that sort of thing. But if I'm still down in the dumps and stuff, a little bit of THC not only helps the CBD do its job better, but it lifts the whole organism up just a notch. It's like just vibrating at just in a slightly different key.
Absolutely. And for my listeners that aren't pianists,
Right.
the CBD would be the drum and bass, and the THC would be more of like the guitar vocals for you.
Yes. Yeah. The basses and the baritones in the choir, and the altos and sopranos in the treble clef.
I love that analogy as someone who's played music my whole life. But
and it doesn't mean that THC can't calm you down and put you to sleep.
No, and with patients I've worked with ADHD, THC is actually something that does help a lot of people calm down.
Right, and
depending
what I find
on
it's a balance.
Yep, and everyone has their own very personal one, which makes the job that you do kind of difficult.
Right, but the good news is I'm not here to prescribe or diagnose or predict. I can only educate and try to make the decision-making process, the process of being exposed to the options, narrowing the choices, and then encouraging people to trust their own intuition, that you're just going to feel drawn to this one instead of this one, and to go with it. And continue to follow my two favorite phrases: educate before you medicate, start low and go slow. And if you follow those two basic principles, you'll be, on a good path. And I think it's really important for, people who work behind the counter to know those same ideas. Right now, my job since COVID, and since I've been working at home and I'm not able to go out into the community to teach, I've had to redefine my job description. And fortunately, my employers are, so gracious and so helpful in kind of giving me range and encouragement to find other ways. And so one of those is to help in store with staff training and helping to educate our behind the counter folks into, changing their vocabulary, learning their products, really understanding what those ratios mean so they can explain them to their customers, and to help the customers feel more comfortable about giving it a try without being afraid of the consequences. And if it doesn't work, take a little bit more or change the ratio.
Yeah.
It's an experiment.
Do you have any product recommendations that are good for helping find your perfect ratio, or just that you found are very, just good products in the Washington market that you've worked with?
Yes, definitely in the Washington market, we've been really good. One thing that's interesting about, from what I'm learning as I read about other states, in Washington, because medical was so well established before adult use came on, producers, growers and producers had a chance to develop various product lines that were for the non-smoking consumer.
Mm-hmm.
So by the time I came on in 2017, Satori at that time, Peace of Mind, had only been opened a year. And there was already a nice selection of tinctures and topicals and capsules and, everything in addition to beautiful flower on the other side of the store that, you could choose from, but it made that process so much better. So I found myself gravitating towards certain brands. One, because they met certain criteria. I have a very sensitive constitution. And so I had to be very careful that they were clean, pure. There's no such thing yet as pure organic products, but there are growers and producers who are aiming for those kinds of certifications and really take great pride in making them as clean and safe, as much for their medical patients from the earlier days, but also for the new people coming on board who may never be medical patients in the state system, but are clearly using it as their medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm looking for ones that have the certification that says they've been, clean grown, minimal amount of safe pesticides, and or herbicide type things, but herbicides are seldom ever used. Washington's a little bit behind in their actual testing for the presence of those, but most of the growers and producers that I've met that are focused on serving that demographic, they're taking on that responsibility to keep the quality high. And so there are several brands that I just gravitate to that are kind of at the top of their game and are constantly improving it. So those are the ones that I'm happy to suggest.
We've, I think it was last year, Washington they no longer require pesticides to be on the labels. So it's something you definitely have to inquire with the company. So it's good to find a consultant who speaks with the growers and the producers directly.
Right. And you can usually go to their website and they will have that information on their website. So even if the older person that you're working with doesn't want to mess with the internet, give them enough information on a piece of paper that they can ask their son, daughter, grandson, daughter, niece, nephew, whatever, would you go online and look this up and see if you think this is, if these folks are up to speed?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then the second part of that equation is understanding the ratios, because CBD and THC are still the two most dominant cannabinoids that you'll find in most any product. And we talk in the language of ratios, and those ratios will not have any particular meaning to most consumers, not just seniors, but most consumers. But you need to be able to explain that and why they vary from as many as 50-1 CBD to THC down to 1-1. And some are molecular isolates and some are whole plant extracts. I happen to lean towards whole plant extracts. I just like thinking that Mother Nature created it the way she did, because there's all kinds of goodies in there that the human body can take advantage of.
Definitely.
And I want the full cocktail, so to speak.
Yeah. And after traveling to extraction sites, you've probably spoken to some scientists who have told you there's so many other compounds. Excuse me. We've been focused on cannabinoids because we were lucky that Raphael Mechoulam in Israel found THC and CBD, but terpenes and flavonoids and all of these things that we haven't had a chance to research yet could be so important in that synergy. So I also I don't know if you can tell, I'm a little whole plant biased as well.
And I think that's okay, because until we really have, years more of legitimate scientific inquiry now in the States ourselves, so we can actually be testing our local grow our local strains, what our medicines are made from, because it still comes from a plant. It doesn't come from a laboratory. And so it can vary greatly. And the good news I see now in the industry is that because of 2 years ago when CBD was just kind of set loose on the country as available, and all these CBD producers started popping up all over without any regulation.
Yeah.
There's some real caution that needs to be had, because people can hear about how great CBD is and they may go buy something, in a non-reputable resource without any documentation, without any research, and they either may get nothing, meaning there's really not really any cannabinoids in it to begin with, or it actually may be toxic to the human being. And so I look forward to more and more research coming out so that people can understand what CBD is designed to do, how it works in the body, so that people can make wiser choices and select quality products for that reason. And eventually increase regulation to include the CBD market, because it's not really competitive, but it's confusing.
Yeah, and people who are staunchly disagreeing with cannabis sometimes get a CBD product that has no CBD in it,
right?
And then you've lost to them forever, and that can be very frustrating.
Yes,
for someone advocating for the plant.
Yeah, for sure.
I've had the opportunity to visit you and just visit Peace of Mind Cannabis, and the layout is really nice because, as you mentioned earlier, there's flower on one side, there's wax in the corner, and then you've got edibles and tinctures and capsules in their own location. I find this very helpful because I just veer right to the area I'm looking for.
Right.
And I'm curious, has this been well received in the senior demographic? Is there a way that a shop can be more friendly to older adults?
Well, that particular distinction is an important one, because that sense of overwhelm when you walk in the shop for the first time can be pretty daunting, and people get kind of shy and like, oh my gosh, am I in the right place? So
yeah.
First and foremost, you want to make sure that they feel very welcomed, that you're glad to see them there, and that you look forward to helping them find what they're looking for. You want to build that rapport and to get to know them enough that they feel that they can trust you with what you're about to share. Because they know little to nothing, or if they've done a little bit of research or only have memories from decades ago, they may need a little help in correcting the misinformation from the propaganda days, to the most current research. And it's a real responsibility for those of us that are in the cannabis industry, and particularly helping clients and customers find their right medicine, is to stay up to date on the research and the products that are in your store, how they're made, why they're made, what they're good for, and to be offering caution when necessary. And most of the time for the senior population, I do not recommend edibles. And here's the reason why. Edibles, because they have to be ingested and go through not only the digestive system, but also the liver before the cannabinoids get released into the bloodstream, it can be an hour or up to 4 hours before the psychoactive or CBD quality is into the bloodstream for them to even know if it's going to be of help. So if after an hour and a half or so, they're saying, well, this isn't anything, I might as well take another one or another one or another one. And next thing you know, they've eaten all 10 of them. And now they're in trouble because they've just overloaded their system with way more cannabinoids than their system can possibly, and they're stuck with it. And so I recommend microdosing with everything. And I tell people, start with a tincture or something that you can control the dosage from the onset, that's more likely for you to feel in a shorter period of time, because a tincture you can put under your tongue, leave it there, let it move around, it'll a little begin to absorb through the mucosal lining in the mouth, and then gradually work through the digestive system. And if you do those on an empty stomach as opposed to a full stomach, it's likely also to get through that digestive system and enter the bloodstream, so that within, anywhere from 30 minutes to maybe 2 hours, you'll know. And then you can always take a little bit more.
Yep, you can't go back, you can only go forward.
Right, and that's why start low, go slow. And that method of gradually increasing dosage, whether it's in a day or over a week or several weeks, and again, that's very individualized, is called titration. So if you hear that name or you use that name as, someone who is selling the product, let them know that it's about a gradual process of increasing, because we don't yet know on any individual basis how much any one person needs in order to bring their own endocannabinoid production into greater balance. Because aging in itself can diminish the ability of the endocannabinoid system when it's working normally and it's allowing that balance to happen, and you feel good, you stay well, you're not aging, that beginning to diminish or become, through trauma or surgery or other life experiences, kind of short circuits the body to create its own. So some people may be low in the human cannabinoid called anandamide that helps to regulate mood and sense of well-being. And others may be deficit in the CBD one, which is called, is it 2-AG? I always forget the...
That's not one I know. I know anandamide.
Okay, well then there's 2-AG, I think, which is the more chemical name. It's not as pretty, so that's why I forget it. So that's the one that needs buffering. And I think I'm more deficit in that one than the feel-good one, because when my body feels good, my spirit is naturally lighter and I feel good. And so there are times, though, when, depending on life circumstances, if something is particularly stressful and I feel weighted down by it, then I'm going to want that little bit of extra THC, because my body's not able to quite give me enough to bring me back into a state of saying, I'm okay, the world's okay, let's keep going.
When you're recommending titrating specifically to senior customers, what milligrammage do you tend to ask them to start with? Maybe 2, 5?
It varies, and the main variable is the ratio. If it's very high CBD, like a 20-to-1, 30-to-1, 50-to-1, something like that, they probably can onboard a little bit more, say more like a half a dose.
Yeah.
Than if it's a 1-to-1 or a 2-to-1, where there's 2 parts CBD to 1 part THC. Then I would say drop down to that 2.5 amount, because what we want to find is that comfort zone of effectiveness that doesn't feel like psychoactive buzzing of any kind, or just discomfort with a state of mind that's just not quite feels normal or feels natural.
Yeah. I spoke with someone, I wish I could credit the right person. I don't remember who it was, but they said that feeling high, or, even that uncomfortable, but just getting stoned is actually, and I hate this word, but an overdose of cannabis, because that nice equilibrium, you've passed it once you've become stoned. And as we're speaking, I very much am finding more and more foundation in that statement.
Yeah, and what I like to call it is psychoactivated or intoxicated.
Intoxicated is a great one, yeah.
Yes, because in that way, it's no different than enjoying a glass of wine in the evening. And everyone knows their limit of where they just feel, eased and, enjoying the company of family and friends. Life is good. But the minute you get into that second glass or third glass, for me, I can do about this much, and I'm quickly out of my comfort zone.
Yeah.
And I unfortunately end up having a much harder time the next morning. Whereas even if on some evening where I just want to feel that little bit of an extra lift, I sometimes enjoy that little bit of an intoxicated feel with cannabis, because I can feel it in my muscles. I can feel that hypertension that I just naturally carry in my body. I feel it melting. I can then do yoga. I can, go for a walk, and I'm not being controlled by my aches and pains. I'm actually enjoying my body and being able to move around and, laughing and having conversation with friends. So there's that wonderful little space. And for me, it takes very little THC for me to reach that. In fact, I've got my system down so much, I use a diluted version of a highly concentrated form of a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 to CBD to 1 THC. And if I take 3 drops, I'm just right in the zone. My mind is clear. I can get work done. I'm, have energy. My thinking is good. If I take that 4th drop, I can feel it.
Yeah.
Now, if I want to be at home and, dancing around my living room or stretching or, exploring that one weird little ache I get back here, and I'm able to go into it in a way that is not making it worse, but actually inviting it to let go. And I see great potential for the physical therapy world when we've got the mastery of dosages down to the point where a physical therapist could introduce enough of a CBD THC combination that allows enough THC interaction that helps to change the perception of pain in order for someone that has to move in order to heal from the surgery, can reduce the pain and heal faster because they're getting circulation and activity into those muscles that you're trying to reawaken after a major event like that.
Yeah, it would be really lovely if a massage therapist could have their balm and pull out a CBD balm. And I'm really curious. We just had the election and cannabis won in a big way. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on the future of cannabis, specifically how practitioners might be more open-minded to utilizing the plant.
I do. I think that's inevitable because it is becoming so acceptable. I think I saw a poll saying that even in states that haven't yet legalized it, even for medical, the general US population is like in the 60 to 70 percentile of sure, go ahead, it's fine. Yep. I may not use it, but I don't care if somebody else uses it. So I think we've kind of crossed over that tipping point. And now I think the key will be all the new science that begins to come out as legalization spreads and more, if we can get it descheduled and ultimately uncriminalized.
Federally.
Yes, federally. Then that opens up all kinds of research opportunities so that we can really kind of catch up on the 80 years of prohibition where we couldn't do the research to find out why this is such a magical plant and take the magic out of it and put the knowledge into it so that people can make really educated choices about, is this what you want to use? And in most cases, it doesn't require people to give up their other medications. And in fact, many times it works very synergistically and allows patients who maybe are on a number of pharmaceuticals to begin to cut back on the ones that are causing the most adverse side effects.
My most favorite part of working behind a dispensary counter is the first time I worked in medical in a couple of states. And so specifically Arizona, a lot of people would come in and they have a very foggy look in their eyes and usually a little angry and they can't control it. And after months working with them closely and you slowly find the right products, the clouds tend to lift, the anger tends to lift, and then finally they tell you something like, I used to be on 11 medications and now I'm down to 6. And just that has changed their life. And that experience, I'm going to cry a little maybe. That experience is just beautiful. And
it is.
It's definitely life-changing. And I don't think that people speak enough about how prohibition has stopped researchers from being able to actually figure out how the plant works in the human body.
Right, exactly. And the whole opioid epidemic, which is one of the tragedies of our times, in states that have opened up even just to medical, where people have the choice to begin to integrate cannabis into the regimen, they cut back on the opioids, and some, not all, but some are eventually able to manage their pain in such a way that they don't need the opioid at all. But the most startling statistic that I did say is that in states that have legalized either specifically medical or full adult use as well, the opioid overdose rate goes down like 20%. That means 1 in 5 persons who risk a serious consequence of overdose or death from the use of opioids is now able to find a new way to live a more functional and productive life.
Yep, it's a very beautiful statistic.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I've definitely picked your brain and gotten the information I'm really looking for, and I would love to hear in our last question about what your plans are for the future, whether that be with Peace of Mind Cannabis, with educating during the times of COVID, so taking that to video. What's Nancy's plan?
Well, Nancy's plan is to stay working at Peace of Mind as long as they'll have me, because I love it, and it's giving me a new lease on life in so many ways, to be part of something, one, that's greater than myself, where I'm working with a group of wonderful people on a common mission. So that part I really love. And I love having the freedom to explore ways to take my love of knowledge and education to broader and broader audiences. I just recently joined an educational committee with the Cannabis Alliance, which is a Washington State trade association that supports the cannabis industry in all kinds of ways. So I'm really looking forward to working with a new group of people as we create programming to get knowledge and information and reliable resource out to the public, but also to the industry, because educating the industry is just as important. It's one of the fastest growing industries. There's hundreds of thousands of people already employed within the cannabis world because they're desperate for workers. And many of those have not been trained. So one of the things that's been added into my job description since, because of COVID, I'm no longer working in the store as a high risk senior, is that I'm helping to develop training programs within our company to make sure that our staff that are behind the counter have the knowledge and the language and the perspective they need to really provide the service that we want them to be able to provide to any age group and to any demographic. And particularly because they started out in medical as a company, they always want to make it as available as possible to those customers that are registered medical patients. And so we make a real point to help ease that hoop jumping that people have to go through to actually get their certification so that they can go into the store and get extra special attention, but also to get a price break, because they oftentimes, some of them can microdose and do fine with that, but some of them need considerably more medicine than what is allowed by law for any single person purchasing. And so this allows them to access the medicine that they need for, some very serious conditions that, they have a right to choose their means of managing it and bringing quality of life in whatever way they can.
Absolutely.
So those are my directions. Oh, and my new thing is also to advocate for social justice and equity in the world, because what we've been through the last year in our country with the focus on racial injustices, the original prohibition was racially motivated.
Mm-hmm.
And so the incarceration rate of people of color is 3 times per capita what it is for the white population. And so I just have a longing to help those people be freed from unjust punishment for, having 1 joint or, a gram, which is about this much cannabis, and spending years in prison. And so there's 2 different projects. One's called the Last Prisoner Project that I'm learning about. And the other one is called From Prison to Prosperity. And so creating a pathway for people who were incarcerated for cannabis-related crimes, mm-hmm. as they leave the prison system to begin, if they're interested and their path is to participate in the industry, in any part of the industry, from growing it, they may want to work on a farm, they may want to work in a laboratory, they may want to work behind the counter, they may want to, be a delivery person or whatever, but that we can help channel that desire to contribute to something that they loved originally, that they got in big trouble for, and turn that back into something positive in their life so that they can live more normally. So
definitely. And
so those are some of the things that have my attention, and that, I'm one person who's proudly 72 years old, and I don't know how much I can do, but I want to play whatever part I can.
As someone who's entering the Cannabis Alliance, it's great to have an advocate for social equity, because Washington is very much a white owned cannabis industry. Yeah. There are a few people of color who have gotten licenses, but a lot have been pushed out as we transferred from medical to to adult use. So,
right. And same for women. There are organizations that are also, the Cannabis Alliance is starting a women's group too, to help women be part of the upper tier of ownership, management.
Awesome.
And there are plenty already out there, but we really want to make sure that we're well represented in the industry.
Absolutely. There's a lot of unsung women who are doing a lot of the managerial work on the floor, the sales floor, and not being promoted. Yes. So I hope you can help all of those. Yeah. All of those.
And education is the key. Yeah, education is the key. So I'm in my element in any one of those fields. So
I'm so glad,
I look forward to the next 3 years or so. Who knows how long I'll want to stay working, but as long as I'm healthy and it's as satisfying as it is now, I need something meaningful to do with my life, and this feels like a good spot.
That's so wonderful, Nancy. And I've really loved chatting with you today. If anyone wants to reach you, is there an email or a website that they might
Probably
contact?
It's best to go to Peace of Mind Cannabis online and do a contact us, and tell in the email, just mention that you saw me on a webinar and would love to make contact, and they'll connect us. So that's the best way.
That's how I found you.
Yeah, good.
Well, thank you so much, Nancy. I really appreciate your time. And for any listeners out there, fresh episodes will be posted on Ganjapreneur.com, and you can follow us on social media and subscribe to our newsletter for daily news updates. It's been wonderful to spend time together with
Thank
you
Cara.
and you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.